Hello all, welcome back to another interesting session. In this video, we are going to see what is continuous integration and continuous deployment using a tool called GitHub Actions. There were many popular CI/CD tools available in the market as of now, like Jenkins, GitLab, Bamboo, Circle CI, TeamCity, etc. And there were also some cloud-specific CI/CD services available. Like for AWS, we have Code Pipeline, and for Azure, we have Azure DevOps. So as of now, in this video, we are going to see like how we are going to achieve this continuous integration and continuous deployment using a tool called GitHub Actions. So let's get into the video now. Before we start the concept of GitHub Actions, we need to have some basic understanding on the CI/CD process and some other tools like Docker and Kubernetes. So coming to Docker we are using for containerization purpose. So in order to run a Docker container, all we require is a Docker image. So this is point number one. And once the Docker image is built, we need a host or a platform so that we can deploy this Docker image and make our application up and running so that it can be accessible from the outer world. So before anyone wants to know the concept of CI/CD, just they have to be aware about this Docker, what is Docker, and what is Kubernetes. Okay, so let's get into the GitHub Actions concept now. So coming to the CI/CD process, let's say a group of developers are working on building an application with some different features that are requested by client. Okay, so they will be maintaining all the code in a centralized location. Okay, let's say a GitHub repository. Okay, we call this as a source code management tool. Okay, where we will be having all the piece of code. Okay, but this code cannot be utilized directly in order to deploy and access the application. So the code has to be packaged into an artifact. It may be a zip file, war file, or tar file. Okay, it will be updated by developers only in the code itself. Like your code has to be packaged into a which format. Okay, now this artifact will be copied into a Docker image. Okay, this Docker image will be built out of a Docker file. Okay, Docker file is nothing but it contains set of instructions like which files has to be copied on which port your application has to run, and when someone consumes this image and tries to run a container, which script has to be executed at the very beginning. Okay, so that your application will be running successfully. So once the Docker image is ready, it will be uploaded to a container registry. Okay, where we will be maintaining different versions, okay, of images, and the required version will be deployed to the Kubernetes environment. Okay, so this Kubernetes we have discussed just before, it's an orchestration tool. Once the application is deployed into the Kubernetes environment, it can be accessed by the end users or clients. So the process of building the code into an artifact and building a Docker image, uploading it to a GitHub container registry or any Docker private registries, okay, it is called as continuous integration. And the process of deploying it into a Kubernetes environment, we call it as continuous delivery or continuous deployment. Okay, hope this is clear. So now let's see how we are going to use the GitHub Actions CI/CD tool. Okay, and how we are going to perform this all different stages in a sequential manner to package our code, build a Docker image, and deploy finally into a Kubernetes cluster so that it can be accessible from the outer world by any clients or end users. Okay, so let's get into the GitHub Actions concept now. Yeah, coming to the GitHub Actions concept. So the workflows will be basically in the form of YAML format. Okay, YAML is the most easiest human readable scripting, which will be in the form of key and value. Okay, and coming to the folder structure, you have to place your workflows in the very base location of your repository. Okay, that in there we need to create a folder structure with a name called .github. Within that folder we need to create a subdirectory that is workflows, and you can put all your workflows over here. Okay, and in order to run your workflow, all we need is a host so that all process will be executed. So for that workspace purpose, this runner concept will come into the picture. Okay, these runners are basically of two types. One is self-hosted and one is GitHub runner. Self-hosted is nothing but if you want to host your own virtual machine within your virtual private cloud as a runner, you can do that. That configuration I'll show you shortly how to do it. And if you want to use any temporary setup and you don't want to set up any kind of runners on your virtual machines in your virtual cloud, you can use the GitHub runners. So what happens is when you start your workflow, a temporary container will be created and all your workspace will be generated over that container, and once your process execution is done, that container will be removed. So this is the concept of runners. Hope this is clear. Yeah, coming to the concept of triggers. So these are the different types of triggers that we use in our day-to-day activities. So when you want to trigger your workflow manually, So we can use a trigger called on workflow dispatch. And when a developer pushes a piece of code to his repository and a workflow should be triggered, in that scenario, we can use on push trigger. So on pushing the code to the repository, this workflow will be triggered automatically. Okay. Similarly, when someone raises a pull request and wants to trigger a workflow as a check PR check, then he can use a trigger called on pull request. So let's say we have two different repositories, repository and repository B. Okay. So if someone wants to call repository B workflows into repository A and wants to execute all the workflows here, okay. So in that scenario, he can use on workflow call in repository B, okay. And coming to the repository dispatch, when someone has a workflow which is in repository B, okay, and he wants to trigger it from repository A, okay, in that scenario he can use the trigger called repository dispatch. Hope this is clear. So coming to the shared workflows, as we have discussed the concept of workflow call, this concept covers in the same concept of triggers as well. So when we are using a workflow call trigger, we are calling some workflows which are in repository B to repository A. So this scenario, when we will do is, we have hundreds of continuous integration repos, okay, where some scans and build process will be very similar, okay. In order to avoid all the similar piece of code that has to be again followed in your workflow, we can put it in some different repository, okay, that is called a shared workflow, maybe shared workflow repo, and you can call it into your CI workflow whenever you want, okay. Suppose if you want to have a scan workflow, instead of writing whole piece of code, you can just call the workflow which is in repository B, that is shared workflow, and you can execute in your CI without adding any piece of code. Just you can call the workflow by passing a set of inputs. That will be enough. So this will avoid the complications, and we can avoid having a lengthy workflow. So let's say we have hundreds of CI repositories, and in each CI repository, the process we follow will be same. Like we'll be checking out the code, we'll be building artifact, we'll be doing some sort of scans and build a Docker image, push to our registry, and update some configurations and so on. Okay, so the process will be same across your org. So the code for scans, for building artifact commands, okay, and building your image, all this will be same. Instead of writing same piece of code in all hundreds of repositories, you can just put the code in the shared repo. Okay, you can create a different repository or maintain a different folder structure in the same repository, and you can place all your workflows. Like see, as I mentioned, this is in shared repo. You can create a folder structure .github workflows, and you can put all your YAML files, your workflow YAML files, scan YAML, build YAML, okay, and for building your Docker images and updating some kind of cons. All your YAMLs you can put it in the shared repo in this path, in this workflows path, and you can call it into your CI workflows instead of putting the entire piece of code and making your workflow complicated. So this will make our life easy. So this is the concept of shared workflows. So coming to the workflow structure, every workflow will should start with a name, which name has to be assigned to that workflow when you want to trigger and you want to identify. Okay, and coming to the triggers, as I mentioned, we have to mention it in the on block when you want to trigger it. As I mentioned, if you want to trigger it manually, you need to mention it on workflow dispatch. Okay, or if you want to trigger it when some developers pushes some piece of code to your repository, then you can use on push, and you can also mention the branches. If you want to trigger your workflow when a piece of code has been pushed to develop branch or QA branch, that branches you can mention. Or else if you want to mention for all the branches, you can mention just star, okay, so that when piece of code pushed to any branch in your repo, within your repo, this workflow will be triggered automatically, okay. And similarly you can do the same for pull request as well, on pull request for which branch you want, okay. And for every workflow, we will be having certain inputs to pass sometimes, okay. When we are triggering that manually, we want to pass some inputs like image name or image version or any artifact version or anything, okay. So you can pass it via inputs, so it has to be indented this way. Workflow should be indented at least with one or two spaces with the on, and similarly this inputs has also to be indented to this workflow dispatch, and your inputs has to be indented to the inputs with one or two spacings again. Okay, so these your inputs goes on this way, and when you want to describe which type of input it is, you need to mention this way, like if it is a string or if it is a boolean, okay, or if it's a integer or anything, okay, you need to mention its type. You can go through the documentation of GitHub, like how to pass the various types of inputs. And if you want to make this input as a mandatory, without this input, if your workflow shouldn't run, should make this value required as true, so that without passing this value, your workflow will not start. And you can also pass a message, like what is the type of input that a user has to give. You can mention it in the description block. Yeah, hope this is clear till now. So now we have saw like how to pass the name for a workflow, and how to use the different triggers like for manual on push and on pull, and how we need to pass the inputs and the various indentations that we need to follow that I have mentioned here. Now coming to the environment block, okay, and here we can declare the variables. Okay, variables can be static and dynamic. Okay, so let's say if I have a static environment variable, let's say a sort of scan ID, that may be anything. Okay, I'm saying that this value will be fixed in my workflow no matter how many builds I do. This will be maybe same. Okay, so this is a static value, so I can directly hardcode this way. What if your value is dynamic? Okay, let's say we have different image names for this workflow that you need to pass. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm fetching it from the inputs. So whenever a user want to trigger a workflow, he will pass this image name as input, and this input name will be assigned to this image name variable. Okay, we need to follow this way: dollar to curly braces, within that inputs dot which input name you want to assign to this variable. So this value from the input will be assigned to this image name, and this can be utilized in the workflow anywhere. Okay, so the two approaches are: one is dynamic variable allocation, static variable allocation. So you can follow this approach. Okay. So now let's get into the job section now. So now we have completed the environment block, okay, in the workflow. Now let's go to the jobs. Jobs are nothing but different stages in your workflow that you want to run. So as we have discussed, there were many stages in your CIE workflow, right from checkout to publishing the image to a Docker container registry. Okay, so let's say we need to declare the stage name, that is your first job name, with the two indentations with the jobs. Okay, this should be small letter jobs, and I'm mentioning it as the checkout. Okay, so for each job, again you need to have a name. If you want to mention, you can give a detail name, or else it will pick up the same name which is over here. Okay, and then you need to mention on which runner it has to run, the runner concept which we have discussed just before. So currently here, for explanation purpose, I'm using the GitHub runner, that is a temporary container which will spin up and which will check out your repository inside that. Okay, so now the various steps that you need to perform within this job, you need to mention that within the steps. Okay, so in steps you can mention the first step name. You can have multiple steps. Okay, for each step also you need to mention the name for recognition purpose easily. So for the first step, I'm mentioning it as a checkout. So here I'm using a word called uses. What uses does is, instead of using the all shell commands, like all git commands to clone your repository or everything, GitHub maintains some public actions, GitHub public actions. So you can utilize that directly. So what this feature does is, this will check out your repository to your workspace automatically. Action slash checkout at the rate v4. So as the latest version is v4, I'm modifying this way, I'm using this way. Okay, so this will check out my repository, and after that you can write any number of steps. Let's say I'm modifying some files after checking out my repository, so you need to mention the step name, and after that I want to run multiple shell commands, okay, Linux commands. So what we need to do is, we need to mention run. Okay, run colon, after that you need to mention a pipe. So in the next line, with the two indentations, you can write any number of Linux commands, so you can run them in a sequential manner. So hope this is clear. We can have any number of jobs. Okay, and in each job, these things we need to follow, like on which runner it has to run, which name that job should have, and For each step, what is the name? What if you want to use any public action? Like for checkout, I have used this. So suppose if your project is based out of Node, okay, instead of downloading the Node to your workspace, you can directly use a public action. For everything, there's a public action available in the market. So for setting up the Java, setting up Node, setting up Python, everything just like checkout, we have a public action. You can go to the official documentation, so you can set up your jobs this way. Now we will go ahead and see actual workflow, how it looks like, and we'll compare what all the things we have learned here. So now, as we discussed, here is the sample workflow where we are mentioning the name in the first line as a sample workflow, and on trigger, when I want to trigger my workflow, this is manual trigger workflow dispatch that I'm using in the workflow, and the input name which I'm trying to take for this workflow. So I'm taking image name from the user, and I'm trying to execute the workflow. Okay, it is of string type, and it's required, and I have given a sort of description for the user so that he'll read this and put the input. Okay, and now environment block, as I said, this is the dynamic variable that I'm going to assign by consuming it from the input which user assigns or provide to us, and this is a static environment variable. Okay, so this way we can mention the environment variables in the environment block. And coming to the jobs, so we have multiple jobs, as I said. So for the in the first job, checkout, I'm checking out the GitHub repository. So have given the stage with this particular name, git repo checkout, and I'm trying to run it on a temporary container which is of GitHub runner. Okay, so I'm consuming Ubuntu latest, and currently I'm mentioning two steps, okay, just for sample demo. So in the initial stage, I'm using this public actions checkout. So I'm trying to check out the repository, and after that, I'm just trying to run multiple shell commands. Okay, so in order to run multiple shell commands, what I said is to put the run colon, and after that we need to mention a pipe, and you can mention any number of commands this way. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm just creating a test directory, changing my workspace directory to test, and then copying all the workspace files to this test directory, and then I'm seeing all the files, and I'm checking the current working directory. Okay, similarly you can mention any number of stages this way, like build, deploy, everything. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll upload this file to a GitHub repo, and there we will run a workflow, and let's see the output. So now currently I'm in my GitHub repository where I have multiple Node.js related files like Docker file, and I have written a piece of code for my application. You can consume it and deploy it however. Okay, so here we have a file called package.json. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write a workflow. As I mentioned, it should be in .github workflows directory. I have written a new file, mybuild.yaml. Okay, and my workflow name is my sample workflow. Okay, and as I mentioned, the code will be same, just have copied from there. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to copy this package.json, okay, from my workspace to this test directory in the same script which I mentioned. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm just committing this file, and now here if you see this option view runs, click on it, and once you see on your left side of the page, you will find the workflow name which we have committed just now, that with the name called my sample workflow. Okay, this is the option where we need to run the workflow. Okay, on clicking on this, we will be getting two options. Like first one will be the branch name. In the real-time scenario, we will be having hundreds of branches, but in the test repository, I have only one branch, that is master. I'm selecting it, and the image name, okay, that I'm just passing some sample image, and I'm trying to run the workflow. Let's see the outcome. So it is fetching Ubuntu latest. So what it has done, it has downloaded current repository. This all files will be downloaded to this Ubuntu latest container. Okay, this Ubuntu container which is maintained by GitHub, and inside that my files will be downloaded to this particular path. Okay, after that we are trying to run multiple shell commands, right? So we are creating a test directory, we are changing our directory to test, copying the package.json to the test directory, and we are trying to list it. Okay, so what we got in that list, only package.json file is there. Okay, as it is empty, we have copied just this file, we got that in the log, and we are checking the present working directory. So inside your runner, this is the path, this is the workspace where your all files get generated. So this is the test directory that I've created. In this way, you can add any number of stages and run the workflow sequentially and achieve your CI. So now let's see another workflow which I've created earlier. So where I'm trying to take two inputs from the user, that is major version and minor version for my Docker image. Okay, and I'm adding an additional trigger, that is on push. Okay, whenever a push happens to this master branch, this will be automatically triggered, that we are going to see shortly. And environment block, as I said, I'm fetching the dynamic variables from the inputs which user will assign, that is major and minor version. And after that, let's see the jobs. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm building my Docker image and pushing to it a container registry, my own container registry. Okay, what we are doing is we are trying to check out the code. Okay, and after that, as I said, we have many public actions available in the market. So for downloading the node to my workspace, I'm using this action setup node. Okay, it will download the node.js to my workspace, and we can use any node commands within our workspace. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm installing the dependencies which are mentioned in package.json in the node project, and after that I'm running some scripts. Okay, and after that I'm logging into my Docker registry. So my Docker username and password are mentioned in the secrets. Okay, if you have any sensitive information, you can go to settings, and here if you scroll down, there's an option called secrets and variables. Within that, you should select the actions, and you can add your sensitive information like passwords, any type of credentials. And in order to refer this in your workflow, you need to follow this secrets dot that value will call that particular credential. Okay, my Docker password, I have mentioned it as Docker token. Okay, so I'm calling it with secrets dot Docker token, and I'm passing it to this public action. Okay, if you open this public action, you will get to know which inputs you need to pass, customize the inputs. Okay, so this public action requires username and password that I'm passing, and after that what I'm doing is I'm building the Docker image out of this Docker file which I have. Okay, I've written a sample Docker file, so I'm just building it. So further also we have a public action, and in order to build a image we need a tag, right? So major version and minor version, we are taking it from the users itself. Okay, and this is major and minor, and patch version will be my GitHub run number, that is your build number. Okay, let's say you are building 100th build. Okay, this number will be replaced with 100 build number. I'll show you shortly. Okay, now out of the Docker file, we are going to build the Docker image that we are going to see shortly. And I'm going to commit this file, the master branch. If we go to view runs, see this triggered automatically. This got triggered because we have a trigger called on push. And I'm opening this. Now here there will be a catch actually. We didn't pass the inputs major version and minor version, so our image name will something be like, see, major and minor versions are missing, they are blank. Okay, now if I go back, trigger it again, and I'll pass the major version as 3, minor version as 5, and I run the workflow. Okay, I'll refresh it. Hope you got the difference, right? When I'm triggering it manually, I can pass the inputs. Okay, so if you want to pass some inputs, you need to use manual trigger, and if you don't want to pass any kind of triggers, then you can use on push trigger. Okay, now if you see our Docker image, see the major version which we gave 3 and 5 just got updated with the build number 8. Okay, and if you see the workflow is success, and image got pushed to the container registry. Okay, what stages happened here? We checked out the code, we have installed the node.js, and we have installed the dependencies required for this build. We have ran some test scripts, we have logged into the Docker container registry, we built the image, and after that what all things we have set up, it will remove automatically. Okay, GitHub has that feature. This video is very similar to a real-time scenario, so I would recommend you not to skip the video till end. So in this current video, we are going to see these 8 different things. So breaking down the video into 8 different parts, let's go in a sequential manner. Okay, so let's see how to configure a workflow with multiple jobs. Yeah, so in this video, we are using the same repo that is used in the previous session. So here I have configured a new workflow. So coming to the first part, how to configure multiple jobs. Okay, so I have configured a new workflow and I have named it something like CI workflow, and I'm triggering it on event like manual trigger, that is workflow dispatch. So currently while triggering, I'm fetching two inputs from the user, that is major version and minor version. So in environment block, I'm declaring runner variable that I'm hard coding it because it's a static value. Okay, and the major version and minor version would be dynamic, so something it will depend on the user's choice. So I'm fetching it from the inputs and assigning them to the major and minor versions. So this covers my environment block. Hope this is clear. And coming to the jobs, so I'll be explaining what I'm doing in the jobs configuration. So first, see how to configure multiple jobs. Okay, so in the jobs, what I'm doing is in the very first job, I'm exposing the variables that I'm using in the current workflow that are being used. Okay, and in the second stage, what I'm doing is, suppose if user is passing the major and minor version, and he's trying to run the workflow like that, he has done some hundreds of workflows, and if he wants to see some of the old workflows inputs, that would be hectic to find out from the logs. So instead, I'm just printing the inputs as the summary, okay, that we are going to see very shortly. Okay, and in the third stage, what I'm doing is I'm just generating the build version for the Docker image. After that, what I'm doing is I'm installing the dependencies for the current application for my repo. Okay, after that, I'm running some test cases, okay, random test cases. After that, what I'm doing is I'm just building a Docker image and pushing it to the Docker container registry. So this is how I have set up multiple jobs, okay, within a workflow. So this suffices our part 1. Yeah, coming to the second part. In first part, we saw how to configure multiple jobs within a workflow, and in the part 2, we are going to see how to execute them in a sequential manner. So let's jump into the workflow again. So in order to make the jobs run in a sequential manner, what we need to do is we need to create a dependency. Okay, how we need to create a dependency, let's see. So currently I want my variables job should be running in the first place. Okay, after that my inputs job should start. So what I'm doing is I'm writing a block called needs. In that I'm declaring the job one, that is variables. So what it will do is this inputs use job will run only after the variables job is successful. Yeah, hope you got it. So in the similar way, if we go to a third job, what I have done is I have mentioned the second job name, that is inputs used. So when job 1 and job 2 are done, then only my job 3 would run. So similarly, I have configured my entire workflow so that it will be running in a sequential manner. So now we saw how to configure multiple jobs within a single workflow and how to make them run in a sequential manner. Okay, now let's jump into the part 3, like how to configure a shared workflow. Okay, so for this I have created a separate repository. So let's jump into that repository now. So this is the GitHub repo that we are discussing about shared workflows. Okay, so after creating a shared workflow, first thing you need to do is go to settings tab, and in the left side you will find an option called actions. In that, navigate to general. So these are the repository permissions. Once you create your shared workflow within your organization, sometimes you will get an error like workflow not found or something else. That is because the permissions for your workflow. So I'm allowing it for all actions and reusable workflows. And in the end, there will be another option if you are within an organization. Okay, that you need to set it like it should be discoverable from other repositories within your organization. Okay, on selecting that option, your workflows will be discoverable. This is something that I want to share. And as we discussed in the previous session, your workflows should always be in this path, that is .github/workflows. If I open it, see, I have written 4 shared workflows. The thing is, in every CI workflow, there will be multiple scans and multiple stages that will be common across all the repositories. Okay, like for Node projects, for .NET, for Java, let's say. Okay, for each and every framework, the process will be same, scans will be same. Instead of writing all similar piece of code, we can configure the shared workflows this way, and by calling just the name of your shared workflow, entire piece of code will be replicated to your main workflow and gets executed. So to avoid the complications and to decrease your CI workflow length, okay, we can use the shared workflows concept. So for the demo purpose, what I have done is I have break down the workflow into 4 jobs. Okay, for that 4 jobs I have written 4 shared workflows. So the first one goes like, I'm creating a build version for my Docker image. Okay, here I'm using a trigger or event called on workflow call. Okay, whenever this workflow is called with this particular name and with this inputs, okay, this workflow will be executed. Okay, let's see the inputs: major and minor version and runner. These 3 inputs we will be getting it from the user itself. Okay, I mean, we need to pass it from the main workflow. Okay, so coming to the job, here the runner will be replaced with the value that we are passing from the input from main CI. Okay, and the job will start. Okay, so what it will do is first it will check out the repository. This is not required, just I've written it. And here the main motto is to generate the build version, right? So I'm writing a shell command in the step 2. Okay, that is image version, that is v major version dot minor version dot run number. Okay, major and minor version we will be getting it from the inputs, okay, that are passed to this shared workflow, and this run number we will get it automatically from the GitHub events. Okay, so what I'm doing is again I'm calling the image version from the previous step, I mean previous command. Okay, and I'm exporting this image version as a GitHub output. Okay, this is important, GitHub output, I'm exporting it. Okay, so for this single job, I have written an outputs block in line number 22. If you see, that is image version. So how I'm getting this value? See, steps. This is the steps. Create tag. For this particular step, I have added the ID called create tag. So within the steps dot create tag, in that there is an output. So here is the output. Okay. So in this, the image version name will be called over here. Okay. So this is how I'm exporting the outputs. So what happens is in a general workflow, okay, if it is not shared, okay, if you are exporting the output for a single job, this will be okay reachable, I mean this can be used within a single workflow only. We cannot use this into a different workflow. Okay, now the scenario is here we are in a shared workflow and we are passing some outputs. This will not be used in your main workflow again. Okay, in order to make that reusable, or we need to, if we need to pass this output to a different workflow, what we need to do is we need to configure outputs just like we are taking inputs from this, from the main workflow. We need to pass output to the main workflow also. Okay, so here what I'm doing is again I'm declaring the image version. Okay, how we are getting this image version is, see, from jobs generating build version, in that we have an outputs called image version. Same thing I've written here. Okay, jobs dot generating build version, in that outputs we have in that image version. Okay, so this is the value assigned to the image version. So just like we are fetching inputs from the main workflow to shared workflow, we are exporting the outputs from shared workflow to the main workflow. So that's the concept, guys. So similarly, for building artifact, for building image and pushing it to Docker registry, okay, Docker container registry, and running test case, I have written like 4 shared workflows. So this is the concept. In the next part, we are going to see how these shared workflows will be consumed in the main workflow. Okay, so we have completed 3 parts, like configuring multiple jobs, running them in a sequential manner, and how to configure shared workflows. These 3 parts we saw. And now coming to part 4, how to consume this shared workflow within your main workflow. Okay, so let's jump into the main CI workflow now. So now in the main workflow, how to use the shared workflow. Okay, so in job number 3 of generating build version, here I'm using a shared workflow called generating build version.yaml that we saw in the shared workflow just now. Okay, that is in the master branch. So how we can use is, we need to give the owner name slash repository name followed by the path of the shared workflow, and you need to mention at the rate in which branch it is. Okay, so as it is in master branch, in the particular path called GitHub workflows followed by the workflow name. Okay, this is how you need to mention the shared workflow, so that this entire workflow will be called into your main workflow. Okay, here by passing these inputs. Okay, runner, major version and minor version. So if you see, only these 3 inputs we are passing, right? Runner, major version and minor version. So similarly for the next stage, that is to install dependencies also. So this is the repo owner name, and this is the repository name followed by the path of the workflow, and @branch name. Okay, and with the input called runner, because this workflow has only one input, that is runner name. So similarly for all the rest of jobs I have configured the same. Okay, what changes is the shared workflow name will change and branch and all will be same. Okay, this depends again on your configuration. So this is how we consume a shared workflow in a main workflow. Okay, so let's go to part 5. So in part 5 we are going to see how to pass inputs from main workflow to a shared workflow. Okay, so let's jump into the workflow again. So again, coming to job 3, we are using a shared workflow here. Okay, this requires 3 inputs. So if you want to pass input from main workflow to a shared workflow, you need to use a block called with. Okay, with this inputs using this shared workflow, it will pass to a shared workflow. Okay, that you have configured in users. Okay, so if you want to pass inputs, you need to use with block. So this is part 5. So part 6 is how to export outputs from shared workflow to a main workflow. This already we saw, but we will have a quick glance again. So if you want to export any value to your main workflow from shared workflow, you need to mention it in the outputs block. So the mechanism is simple. The way you consume inputs from main workflow to shared workflow, you need to pass outputs from shared workflow to main workflow. Okay, so you need to mention in the outputs block, which should be indented same as inputs. So this is part 6. So coming to part 7, how to pass secrets from main workflow to a shared workflow. The thing is, all the secrets will be configured within your CI main workflow only. So if you want to pass those secrets from your main workflow to a shared workflow, how do we configure that? That we are going to see. So the concept is simple. In my main workflow, I have all the secrets, but in my shared workflow, we don't have secrets of all the repositories. Okay, in order to pass the secrets from your main workflow to shared workflow, we need to use a block called secrets to inherit. Okay, so what it does is it will inherit all the main repository secrets to your shared repository. So this is part 7. So coming to the last part of the video, we are going to see how to export a GitHub summary. Okay, so as we discussed, developers will be doing hundreds of builds per day, and it's very difficult to find some information from the previous executed workflow. So in order to overcome this issue, we can export the data that we require as a summary for your executed workflow using this flag called GitHub step summary. Okay, this will export the value which you have mentioned in the echo statement to your summary of your workflow. Okay, that we will see once the workflow is executed successfully. So as we have completed the 8 parts, let's have a quick recap of the workflow. Okay, the name of workflow is CI workflow, and we are using an event called workflow dispatch, that is a manual trigger. And currently we are fetching 2 inputs from the user, that is major version and minor version. Okay, coming to the environment block, we have 3 variables, that is runner, major version and minor version. The value of runner is static, so we have hard coded it. Okay, and for the variables major version and minor version, the value will be dynamic, so we are fetching it from the inputs block. Okay, this is about the environment block. And coming to the jobs, the first job we are using is variables. Why we are using variables? Because we are exporting the values of the environment block. Okay, in a workflow, if you are not using a shared workflow, directly the environment block variables can be referred in your workflow. Okay, so this will work whenever you are using a shared workflow and you are trying to pass these values to a shared workflow. This may not work. Okay, this will be passed as a blank value. So in order to overcome this, I have configured a new job, that is variables, where I'm exporting the outputs of all the environment variables. Okay, and whenever you want to use or whenever you want to pass the values to a shared workflow, you can directly pass from the job one's outputs. Okay, job one output means, see, in the third job, that is building version, I have created a dependency on the variables. Okay, that is the job one where I'm exporting the outputs. Okay, so here in needs variables outputs, okay, in this outputs, what all the 3 environment variable values are there, I can fetch it from job one. Okay, instead of fetching it from the environment block. So this is why we are using variables job. Okay, that is job one. And in job two, just I'm printing the what are the inputs user is passing to the current workflow, that to a GitHub summary. Okay, that I'm just exporting like a GitHub summary. We are going to see that shortly once the execution is done. And in third stage, we are generating the generating the workflows Docker build version. Okay, So we are consuming the shared workflow and we are using a with block and we are passing three inputs required for that shared workflow. Similarly, we are installing dependencies using a shared workflow again by passing a input called runner. And fourth or fifth job is test case. Okay, again we are using a shared workflow with the input called runner, and in the final stage, once all these stages execution is done and it's success, the last stage will be executed where we will build a Docker image and publish it to a Docker container registry. Okay, this is about the workflow that I have configured. Now we are going to execute and see the result. So now on clicking on view runs, so it will navigate to the workflow that we have configured, and here we can see the option called run workflow. This we will get when we are using an event called workflow dispatch, that is a manual trigger. Okay, here I'm selecting the branch, so I have configured my workflow in the master branch. So here currently I'm trying to give the version like 4 is the major version, and let's say 9 will be my minor version. Okay, and I'm running the workflow. So I'll refresh the page. See, workflow has started, and if you open the workflow, see, as we said, we are executing the workflow in a sequential manner. First we are exposing the variables and we are trying to print the inputs that I am passing to the workflow, and after that we are generating the build version, we are installing the dependencies, testing the test, we are running the test cases, and after that we are building the image and pushing it to a Docker container registry. Okay, so three stages are done. Installing dependencies is going on. Yeah, this is done. So it will run some test cases if there are any. So I've just written a echo statement as this is just for a demo purpose. Okay, and I'm trying to build and publish the image. Yeah, it's building the image. If we see the image that we published, see, this is the image, my node app, and the version I have used is major version is 4, minor version is 9 that we passed, and as this is the first execution, build number will be 1. Okay, so the image got published, and let's go to the summary. Okay, so if we scroll down, all the executions are done in a sequential manner, and if I scroll down, see the current inputs used, that is the second job, we are printing the inputs, right? So we got the inputs. What runner we have used is Ubuntu latest, and major version is 4 and minor version is 9 as we have mentioned. And coming to the image that we have built and published, that we got is my node app. Okay, major version is 4, minor version is 9, and build number is 1. Okay, here we are going to see how to perform continuous deployment using GitHub Action workflows. So in the previous two sessions, we saw like the basic concepts of continuous integration and continuous delivery, and we also saw the basic concepts of GitHub Action workflows, like how to write a basic workflow, what are the different triggers used, how to use a shared workflow, and various other components. So using that same workflow, we are going to perform continuous deployment. So let's get into the video now. So this is the CI workflow that we have used in the previous demo, okay, where we have declared multiple stages. Like in the first stage, we are just exporting the environment variables as outputs for this stage, so that these values can be passed to a shared workflow. That is the purpose of variable stage. And in the second stage, we are just printing the inputs that are being provided by the user while triggering the workflow. And in the third stage, we are building a Docker image version that we need to publish. And in the fourth stage, we are installing dependencies, and in the next stage we are testing some test cases. Okay, once all the stages are done, we are building the Docker image and pushing it to a Docker container registry. So till here, our CI part is done. So for CD, I'm maintaining a separate repository called my node app CD. Okay, so here I have updated my deployment files, my manifest file in my node app directory. Okay, if you open the deployment file, see, this is the image that I'm building, and I need to update this version on every build. Okay, this is my CD. So how we are going to achieve it? So let's see that. So before going to CD, we need to make some configurations. So for that, navigate to settings. In the left hand side, open environments tab. So these are the environments that we are going to deploy, like QA, UAT, dev, performance. So in the CD repository, if we see the branches, we have all those branches. Okay, so each branch refers to different environment. Okay, suppose if you want to deploy a image to a dev environment, okay, only specific users should have access to deploy that particular image to dev environment. Similarly, it goes for performance, UAT and QA environment. Okay, so you can restrict who can deploy to which environment using this environments configuration. Okay, let's configure a test environment, and here you need to check this box, require reviewers. Here you can give your teammates name. Okay, if you are in organization, you can mention your team member names. Okay, so as of now I'm mentioning my name. Okay, and I'm just saving the protection rules. So once you go back to environments, you can see the test environment that we created just now. Okay, so how we are going to use these environments, I'll show you in this CD workflow. Okay, let's go to the workflows now. So till building image and pushing the image to the GitHub container registry, CI part is done. So in the next part, what I'm doing is I'm adding 4 different stages, that is to deploy to dev, deploy to QA, deploy to performance, and deploy to UAT. Okay, as we have added the environments, okay, those environments I'm mentioning over here, like environment is dev. So what happens is once your CI stage is done, your workflow will be waiting. It will be waiting for some approval request. So who all have access for dev environment, like reviewers who have access on dev environment, they can only approve and deploy to dev environment. Similarly, it will be waiting for performance, QA and UAT. Okay, so who have access, only they can deploy. So what we are performing in deployment stages, here we are installing a package called YQ. Okay, we are consuming a package called YQ. This we will use to replace anything like any string, especially in YAMLs. Okay, this package is meant for YAMLs. So here we are checking out my Node app CD repository, and I'm cloning a branch called dev because we need to deploy the image to dev. Okay, so I'm using my personal access token for my authentication purpose. Similarly, I have used QA branch for QA deployment, UAT branch for UAT, perf for perf deployment. Okay, so in the next stage, what we are doing using that YQ, we are just replacing the image version every time when we want to deploy with the current build version. Okay, once these changes are done in the deployment YAML, if you can see the deployment YAML over here. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm just pushing those changes to the current GitHub repository, that is CD repository. So if you go through my previous videos, I have explained how to deploy Argocd and how to deploy an application in it. Okay, so on deploying Argocd, you can enable an option called autosync. So once the changes are pushed to the CD repository, changes will be autosynced to your Argocd. That you can go through in my previous videos. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see the demo how it works. So I'm triggering the workflow. I'm giving the major version as 1 and minor version as 6, and I'm running the workflow. Yeah, the workflow has started. So now it's installing dependencies that you can check the log here. Okay, and it is running some test cases. Once test cases are done, as discussed, it will build an image and push it to a Docker container registry. Okay, so the image we are pushing is 1.6. Major version is 1, minor version is 6 as we mentioned, and the current build version is 6. Okay, the image is pushed to the container registry. Okay, now the workflow will be waiting for our approval. Okay, and I have access for all the environments to deploy. Okay, now let's check in the performance branch. The current tag I'm using is 1.1.6. Okay, it has to be updated with 1.6.6. Okay, so now I'm clicking on review deployments. So I'll select the performance environment and I'll click on approve and deploy. Okay, on clicking this, see performance deployment will be started and the changes are done. Okay, manifest file is updated. Now here I'll go and refresh the page. See, it got changed to 1.6.6. Okay, changes are pushed just now. So this is how you can deploy to any environment. Okay, so now let's check in UAT environment. Okay, in UAT environment, what is the current version? It's 1.1.6 again. Okay, here again I'll go to summary. Okay, let's review deployments. I'll select UAT and I'll click on approve and deploy. Okay, deployment has started. Okay, changes are pushed to the repository. See, now it's 1.1.6. I'll refresh the page. See, just now it got changed to 1.6.6. Okay, this is how you can push your image to any environment by configuring the environments within your settings tab. Okay, so once the deployments are done, you can scroll down and see the inputs that we have used. Okay, the major version is 1, minor version is 6, and the image that we deployed is 1.6.6. Okay, so a quick recap: the CI workflow consists of multiple stages, okay, that you can add based on your organization's requirement. So in my workflow, what I've done is I have exposed variables, environment variables as outputs for this stage, because environment variables passed to a shared workflow will be passed as a blank value. So that's why I'm referring it from the outputs of the variables. That is the purpose. And after that, I'm printing the inputs that you saw here. These are the inputs that I have printed, which are used in the current workflow. And after that, what I'm doing, I'm generating the build version. Build version is nothing but this version, v1.6.6. Okay, this version we are printing on every CI run. Okay, after that we are installing dependencies required for my application. After that, I'm running some test cases. Once it is done, that image will be uploaded to the GitHub container registry or Docker container registry. Okay, once this is done, the workflow will be waiting for the approvals. Okay, so who has access to DevOps QA UAT, those people can click on this review deployments. Okay, select particular environment and they can approve and deploy, so that particular image will be deployed to the selected environment, that is dev. Okay, deployment has been started if you see. So this configuration, where we need to do is we need to go to settings, and inside environments you can configure any number of environments and add the reviewers, list of reviewers who needs to approve the deployment and deploy to particular environment. Okay, so that's it for this session, guys. Hope this video will be useful in your learning process. And here we end the series of CI/CD using GitHub Actions. In the next session, we are going to see how to configure Helm charts and how to convert normal deployment YAMLs into a Helm chart, and what are the complex configurations involved in it. So till then, stay tuned and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching my video till end.